Zeke is willing to take a pay cut. The question is, though, do you even want him to?
Yeah, this is going to be a tough one because obviously Ezekiel Elliott, he signed that extension for what was that, 6 years? Wasn't that right? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, the 6-year, $90 million extension.
That's it. Thank you so much. And you mentioned that he's making $10.9 million next season. But the tough thing about it is Ezekiel Elliott very clearly became your number 2 back in this on this team this season, right? Like you lost Tony Pollard in your biggest game of the season, and it was very evident that your offensive line play declined in that one, or sorry, offensive line rather, your running back play. I started thinking about what we were talking about earlier, which is the decline just overall in running when Terrence Steele, your right tackle on this season, it seems like your right tackle going forward. Obviously, we'll have to discuss some of that with all, the line and the various free agents that you have. But yeah, no, it was very clear the distinction and the difference that you had when he wasn't playing. However, for Ezekiel Elliott, that was tough all the way across the season, I think, right? Although you say in the beginning of the season, like you saw some rejuvenation or what have you. That being said, Ezekiel Elliott is supposed to run this team. What was that? 10.9. At what point does that become a place where you feel comfortable? Because again, he is a number 2 running back at this point. However, he is a totem for this team, and Jerry Jones loves, and not likes, loves that dude.
And for Ezekiel Elliott this year, a career low in terms of rushing yards, a career low in average yards per carry. He did have 12 touchdowns this year, but also had a career low in terms of the longest run that he had this year at only 27 yards. He did not put the ball on the ground for the first time in his career throughout an entire season, but also had a career low in terms of carries, just 231 carries. Now, part of that, of course, was sharing the load with Tony Pollard, who did, by the way, undergo surgery today for the broken fibula that he had and the high ankle sprain that he suffered in the game against San Francisco. Now, it's tough because, all of the narrative stuff when it comes to Zeke is true. He's been a warrior. He's played hurt. He's played through pain. He's grown up. We've watched Ezekiel Elliott grow up in front of our eyes and really become one of the true leaders on this football team. But you've also, on the flip side, when you see the production from him, it's been a steady decline in terms of the explosiveness, the burst, the ability to hit the home run and to be able to make things happen when things are opened up for him by the offensive line. He just simply doesn't have that anymore. But at the same time, there is something that we saw from him in terms of the short yardage situations, the 3rd and 1s, the 4th and 1s, the dirty yards, the being able to score, from the 1 and 2 yard lines, those kinds of things. There's still some value there. I just don't know relative to what you have now at running back, because here's the biggest question for me. Just for kicks, let's say the Cowboys don't franchise tag Tony Pollard going into 2023, where the tag is going to be over $10 million to keep Tony Pollard on the franchise tag. And he finds money somewhere in the market to go somewhere else to play. You may be in a position where you're forced to keep Ezekiel Elliott, because I don't think, even with the flashes that we saw from Malik Davis, that you feel comfortable elevating him to a number 1 spot in terms of being your lead back on this team. So obviously you have the draft coming up in April, where you can hopefully find yourself a decent back or two to eventually replace that production, again, if Tony Pollard is not here. But you may be in a position where you've got to keep Ezekiel Elliott for at least another year as you start to remake your running back room. Again, this is if Tony Pollard is not here going into next year.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And the tough thing about that is at that point, you need to evaluate what all of your needs are as a team before you start getting an idea of what positions you might actually take in the draft. Because if you do evaluate your positions and you find yourself in a place where you're like running back is one of those positions that you need, you might find yourself taking a relatively high running back. And I'm not saying first rounder and Bijan Robinson, right? So don't put that in my mouth. But and I wish I hadn't said that like that. Regardless.
Yep. You got that.
It'd be like that sometimes. It do be like that sometimes. Point being, though, right? You might end up in a place where you're like, yeah, second, third round running back. All right, cool. And then that ends up being one of those. That's one of your running backs. You get another running back. Maybe it's Malik Davis to be the second running back. And boom, now you are in a place where that's what you are doing, right? You can find yourself in a place where you have a Breece Hall, or you have, one of these many running backs that comes out fresh, young, ready to go to carry a lot of the load, right? That's a possibility. I don't know if it's a probability because, again, I haven't gotten so far as to look at the whole entirety of the team and what's necessary. Outside of that case where it's like, look, draft them and utilize them that way, because those folks that say running backs are not important, you should not like pay them additional money or whatever, like secondary contracts, things of that nature. That is what they want you to do. Go get a relatively good running back, third, fourth round maybe, and then utilize them on that rookie deal. Pay for the yards, not the carries. And at this point, you already pay for the carries in Ezekiel Elliott. Now you're seeing if you can find yourself in a place where you are back paying for the yards. And I have no idea, because one thing that you also need to consider, this was a fairly healthy season for Ezekiel Elliott, to be fair. However, you have had some injuries with Ezekiel Elliott. He has absolutely carried a lot of load, right? What ends up being the anomaly? Is it last season or is it this one? When it comes to like health and, and those things. So I think that that's a fair question to ask when it comes to Ezekiel Elliott.
Now, when you start getting into the actual numbers themselves, Ezekiel Elliott in base salary is due $10.9 million this upcoming season. Now, if you make him a post-June 1 cut, you have a 2023 dead cap of $5.8 million and a 2024 dead cap of $6 million. So you spread out the savings over the couple of years in terms of the cap savings. Now, the cap savings you would have is $10.9 million because you would be able to cut him outright because there is no more guaranteed money left. Now, if you make him a post-June 1 trade, same thing. You have $5.8 million on the dead cap for this year, a little over $6 million for the dead cap for 2024. And again, $10.9 million immediately comes off of your books because, again, no guaranteed money left for him. So that's just kind of some of the numbers that you have in terms of the breakdown for Ezekiel Elliott. I do wonder now, his agent is Rocky Arsenault. One of the legends in the game when it comes to NFL contract negotiators and agents, and that is Ezekiel Elliott's agent. I do wonder what those contract renegotiations would look like in terms of a reduction of salary. Now, if Zeke is to be believed based on the report that we've heard from Michael Gelkin of the Dallas Morning News, then it sounds like, is willing to do what it needs to be done in order to remain a Dallas Cowboy. Now, whether that means taking the veterans minimum, I don't think so.
No, I can't imagine that.
I couldn't imagine that.
Because I feel like he can get the vet minimum elsewhere. And maybe this ends up being like a quality of life situation, right? I know that he has a long-term girlfriend, things of those natures, right? Like, once you have some level of established family, I don't know if he has like a huge established family, but at least I'm going to talk about that from this place, right? There can be value outside of simply the money of it, right? A place that you have value and a place that values you. If you're talking about vet minimum, you could find vet minimum a lot of places, and at that point, the only thing you'd be paying, getting at that point is there. But I do think that if he could find something that is not vet minimum, but also is something that works for the Cowboys, I think the thought process for him is one of, right, he is valuable to the Cowboys outside of just what he brings as running back. Other places, he would just be a running back. To the Cowboys, he is still that dude that wears the number 21 and has like those emotions and those, that nostalgia tied to him. As funny as it is to say nostalgia for a dude who's been in the league for like 5 years.
See, but that's where, and I'll play devil's advocate for just a second here, that's where people would say, who are supporters and love this team, say they're sick of that. They're sick of these players like an Ezekiel Elliott, who's been a warrior for this organization, being kept around because he's been a good soldier for this franchise.
Yeah.
Either his production is there and it's good enough for him to be a contributing member of this team, or it's time to move on for him to allow other guys the opportunity to have larger roles instead of keeping him just for the simple sake of he's been that good soldier for the Dallas Cowboys for the 7 years that he's been. That would be what I'm sure someone who on the other side of that conversation will say to something of that nature.
Absolutely. And so let's talk about it in those cases, right? We've talked about a lot of different things. I think at this point, some of it is also like he is on the book for money, and like you will get cap saving, you will get cap relief cutting him. It will not absolve you of all of his responsibilities, right? Like, or your responsibilities to him rather. So maybe it's a place where I don't know how much he's willing to cut, but is he going to get to a place where like you are going to receive more savings than if you cut him straight up? Or will it even be close to that, where that, because at that point you were also not having to go pay for another running back on top of that with the cap savings. So like maybe he gets you close enough to where he is your second running back and you aren't having to go and pay another running back within that savings that you would have gotten from cutting him, if you understand what I mean. And then at that point, we have to ask the question, how much do you think Zeke has left, right? Because at that point, then he is simply a running back on your team again, and now you have to evaluate him on what he is giving you as opposed to like his contract situation. And the fact of the matter is, as this season went along, you had a lot more 5s and 4s earlier on in the season. In the last, 6 games of the season?
Yeah.
There was a lot of 3s, 1s, and 2s when it came to yards per attempt on his rushing. So like, again, which one of those things do you think is more likely to be the case? And I do not want to neglect the fact that, hey man, blocking matters, and this was not a great, a run blocking team over the course of the backstretch of the season, right? So I don't want to say that is neglected, but do you think that is going to be something that is resolved for him as he continues to get older as running back?
Well, the explosion and the burst and the quickness and those kinds of things, those will continue to decline. I mean, the amount of punishment, and you mentioned it, the amount of punishment that he's already taken, you're not paying for the carries that he's going to get. You're paying for the ones that he's already had. And he's a running back who's had a ton of mileage on him already. From the 817, they make a good point here. When you take care of good soldiers, other players notice that and want to be cared for also, and they've done their good years. If you burn players, they won't want to come here. Absolutely,
and that's I think one of the things that Jerry Jones does have in his favor.
Yes,
I do wonder if you get to a place where it's like, does treating one player badly, I'm just going to say that, right? I'm not going to further qualify. Does that overcome the goodwill that you've banked up? Like, that is a genuine question. That is not one that I'm like trying to use rhetorically. I have no idea.
Yeah. And Jerry's known for taking care of his guys during their playing career and after.
Steven, though.
I mean, Steven been around for the same amount of time. He's watched his dad, take care of these players.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is, Steven it does seem, I should say, coming into more of his own when it comes to like having a finger on the pulse or like a finger on the button of what's happening here. I just felt like that was necessary to know.
No. It's interesting but that's another part of this whole dynamic. And we mentioned, if you make him a post-June 1 cut, all that money comes off of your books. The idea, though, that Tony Pollard, if you tag him, that immediately hits your cap for 2023 if you franchise tag him.
And then you still need to go get a second running back, which I don't know. Maybe it's Malik Davis.
Maybe it's Malik Davis that you elevate.
Maybe you draft another one, right? But like, again, that there is still money that is going to be paid to another guy. Obviously, maybe not a lot of money. Right?
But this is the fine line that you walk when guys are at this point in their career, especially when they've had the kind of production that Ezekiel Elliott has had throughout his 7 years here, but also you're watching a declining player. And it pains me to say that, but that's what the tape shows you. That's what the games that you watch show you, that this is a declining football player. And what his role could be relative to whatever he is paid is going to have to be a decision that Will McClay, Steven, and Jerry Jones are going to have to make relative to what their future looks like and how much more of a larger role will Tony Pollard have going into 2023.
So do you even still want Zeke at that point?
My ultimate thing would be what I think is going to happen. I think he will be a Dallas Cowboy in 2023.
Which is fair. Like I also think that there's like enough of a pull there. But like outside of that, in a fantasy world where Kevin Gray is making the decision on this,
I'd move on. I would move on. Because what more short of Terrence Steele coming back and seeing what he could look like behind, because this is another part about the running game. Obviously, the running game took a steady decline once Terrence Steele was out of the lineup. What does Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard together in tandem, balancing and sharing the carries behind a fully formed and functioning offensive line, do you get some of the production that you may have lost because of how how much the offensive line was dealing with injuries? That's only a question that could be seen on the field when these guys get back together. But if I were the Cowboys and making the decision, I would move on. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I do think Ezekiel Elliott is going to be a member of this team in 2023 on maybe a $2 to $3 million salary for the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, if you get him down to $2 or $3 million, like you significantly change the way that the salary cap that you're getting back, and I like that can be a benefit in itself, even if you don't like the individual move. That can mean something to like the ultimate roster construction, because that's a lot of pie that you're getting back into the fold to utilize to make your team better.